Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor, and I'm joined today by somebody who actually got up at 6 o'clock in the morning just to be here from the UK. Aren't we lucky? And his name is Dave Rogers. Have you ever met someone curious about everything? Well, that's Dave Rogers, aka the Business Explorer, TEDx Speaker, award-winning business consultant, coach and author. For 30 years, he's been using that curiosity to help businesses tackle challenges, spark growth and find innovative ways to succeed. Dave's not your typical business consultant. Yes, he's worked for big organisations, and yes, he knows how to turn lofty strategies into real practical results. But what sets him apart is how he brings it all down to earth, working alongside business owners, startups and leaders to turn what if into what's next. I'm already excited. When he's not deep in strategy sessions or lighting up a room as a speaker, you'll find Dave giving back. He mentors students, supports schools with career guidance, and is chair of the board at the Kaleidoscope Plus Group, a leading UK mental health charity. Wow. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, hello, Ingrid. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to join you this morning from the UK.
I'm just incredibly grateful. And man, if your blurb didn't say enough about you, the fact that you've ponied up looking fresh as a daisy at 6 o'clock in the morning UK time to be here, I'm just so grateful. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Now, before we dive in, tell us a little bit about your business journey, in particular, how you landed here.
Right, okay. Well, it's been quite a journey, as my sort of as the introduction sort of highlighted. So, I've spent 25 years working in large corporate PLCs in the UK, in an area of the UK called the West Midlands, so in and around the cities of Birmingham and Wolverhampton, for those viewers and listeners who know the UK really well. And that gave me the opportunity to work with many people and leaders and leadership teams, helping them understand the commercial impact their decisions were having on the business, and actually how they were interacting with each other to make those sort of decisions better and highlight the risks and opportunities around that. And that really, privileged to work with some global organisations that the Australian viewers and listeners might have heard of. So, for example, Tarmac in the construction industry, or MG Rover in the car manufacturing, or Andrew Sykes in plant hire and heating and air conditioning, but also some large UK hospitality brands like Mitchells and Butlers and Marston's, and having, as you'll appreciate, with some of the clients you work with, those larger organisations give you an opportunity to experience working across multiple functions. So, I've been lucky enough to work in finance, marketing, property franchising, capital investment planning, doing a bit of stuff in mergers and acquisitions. And, that's really given me a great grounding, I think, in just the way business works in general. And it was a successful time, of my career. And, I really enjoyed sort of the people aspect of it as well, and learning about how people work and how you can bring better performance out of them, and therefore better results for both them individually, but also the businesses that we're working with. And then 2020 happened, which sort of the whole world ground to a halt. And at the time, I was still working in the hospitality industry, and much like what happened over with you in Australia, everything just shut down overnight. And what I found was that I had a number of friends and friends of friends who ran their own businesses, small businesses, and they were just coming to me, or I was speaking to them, because they were concerned about what was going on, and I was just helping signpost them really to people that could help them get through the challenges that they were facing in their particular businesses. And it might have been pointing somebody to their landlord or their accountant or the bank to help with financing, those sorts of things. And it suddenly dawned on me through that time that actually all of that knowledge and skills and experience I've gained over the previous sort of 25 years in corporate life, actually people saw value in it, and then I recognised that there was, value in it and the ability to actually help more people more quickly, I suppose is the way I'd put it. And so I sort of decided to, at that point, to effectively leave the comfort of, a relatively successful corporate career with all the safety of, regular paychecks and all that sort of thing, and start my own consulting and coaching business. And and alongside that, that then led to, as you said in my introduction, I've now written two books. I've now had the pleasure of speaking on a TEDx stage. Worked with a number of amazing clients, helping them effectively find clarity in the chaos of business and help them find a way to build businesses that provide, I suppose, provide them with the structure that they want as business owners and leaders in some of the larger businesses, but also gain clarity for their teams and also their clients or customers, which at the end of the day, it's what it's about really, is creating an environment that helps support everybody. And then, of course, how do I find myself speaking to someone over the other side of the world this morning? And that's another thing that, and I appreciate that the pandemic was very difficult for a number of people all across the world. But I think one thing it did do was that it allowed us to break down a few sort of global networking barriers that perhaps were in place beforehand. So I jumped onto a lot of online networking, met loads of people from across the world, including a number of people in America particularly, and then got introduced to our mutual friend Ian Selby over in Vancouver, and we meet, and here we are having a chat this today.
Well, any friend of Ian Selby's is a friend of mine. I love that man so much. I mean, Dave, what a fantastic name. The Business Explorer, because when I was doing a little bit of research for today, I just thought, God, that name, it's just fabulous. It ignited in me, images of uncharted waters, new discoveries, finding ourselves in places that we perhaps hadn't planned. I'm just wondering, what examples of discoveries have you made with your clients that speak to bringing them to a place of possibilities that they hadn't anticipated?
Oh, what a great question. I think there's two that immediately spring to mind. The first one would be, I remember having a chat with a business owner. It was hugely successful family business. They'd been running for 40 or 50 years, and they'd had, and you appreciate this, they'd had quite a lot of success with their sort of cold outreach when it came to sales and particularly upselling additional services. So they were a service-based business, large field, engineer, group delivering for their own clients in the field. And I just remember having a conversation with the owner about the fact that he'd gone, okay, we're having this fantastic performance. We're going to increase our sales team. And you sort of go initially, you think about that and go, great, the revenue numbers are going to be going up and, doubling, and then it was only going from 3 to 5, but that's still a 66% increase in that team's sales
Absolutely.
generation. And of course, we're having this conversation, and he's going away, oh, the revenue's going to do this, revenue's going to do that, and I just sort of went, but have you thought about the impact that's going to have on other parts of the business? Have you got the engineers to deliver that work, and what does that mean for your customer experience, and what does that mean for your employees? Are they going to be working more overtime, which financially might be good, but does that mean that they're sort of work life integration's not as good. And so it's those sorts of things that sort of the questions I ask or the curiosity that I've got sort of brings out. And the other one was again a recent client that I finished working with earlier this year, and quite a reasonably large business in their particular sector in the UK, probably the fourth or fifth largest business. Um, I happen to know the managing director from a previous life in corporate world, and they'd been involved in a little bit of merger and acquisition, and I got asked to go in and do a little bit of discovery work on a new finance system for them. And again, through those conversations, you all of a sudden start unpicking some of the other challenges they might be facing across the business. And it became apparent that actually, in order to deliver some of the efficiencies they were looking and the economies of scale that businesses need as they grow bigger, actually their data structure wasn't quite in the right place to enable them to utilize that for their reporting, and all of those sort of things that in big business you just take for granted. And so we almost went from talking about finding and then implementing a new system to going, well, actually, I need to introduce you to somebody in my network who can help you resolve this data issue, because unless the foundations are in place, you're not going to get the full benefit and realize the opportunities that you want to realize over the coming, months and years. So I think those two things are places where, I've gone in to work on one thing for people, but through the questions or the conversations that we've had, it's ended up them realizing they actually need to do something else. And in the latter example, it actually ended up with me actually saying to a client, well, actually, I don't think you should be paying me anymore at the time being, because actually the work I'm going to be doing is going to be less cost effective for you if you don't go and resolve this first. And it's almost like, that's probably unheard of for, people to go in and actually say to a client, actually stop paying me because
Yeah.
it's not beneficial for you.
But do you know what? That says a lot about you. And that says a lot about the way that you think about your partnerships with your clients,
Mm.
because it tells me everything I need to know about you, which is that you play the long game, that you're really in it to be of value to your clients, and you also have confidence that they'll come back to you,
Mm.
because I think when you know that you're really adding value to a client by helping them to see into dark corners that they otherwise would miss without the questions that are directing their thinking across those different areas of the business, thinking about the 2, 3, 4 steps downstream that are going to impact other areas of the business, and could cause issues. I mean, that really says a lot about you. So I can see why Ian's brought us together. I really
Thank you.
think that's amazing. They're a couple of really great examples though, because I think that first example that you talked about where he
Mm.
wanted to add a couple more salespeople onto his team, and thinking that everything's going to be chickety boo because we'll bring in the revenue and everything will take care of itself. I think that's a big, or maybe a naive way of seeing the role that sales plays without understanding the entire picture that that creates. So tell me a little bit about the advice that they took from you around that, and then what happened after that, because you've really saved them a lot of issues, because they could have increased their sales, but they also could have grown themselves out of business.
Yeah, I mean, that example, you were just talking about there, it was very much a case of, I think they took that step back that I suppose that I was able to bring to them with a fresh pair of eyes, looking at this conversation, and ended up actually sort of delaying delaying the recruitment of those salespeople. Which actually, if you think about that in itself, to your point about, you know everybody's in business to sell what they're selling, and so to go, actually I'm going to stop and something that's going to potentially increase my revenue, to then go and invest in other parts of the business. So they ended up looking at their full customer journey to make sure that that was as smooth as possible first. And then they looked at going, well, okay, if we bring this business in, where's the point that we need to recruit new
Yes.
people in other areas of the business to ensure that everything flows? And I think that's the big thing for me, to your point about that, what I've described as a holistic view of what's
Yes.
happening with the business, is that,
Yes.
and these aren't easy things to fit. It's almost trying to fit, a jigsaw together, almost with all the pieces sliding in at the same time. And so yeah, they just went away and just thought about the whole business and were right, okay, actually, we probably need to think about where are we going to get some more field engineers from? Have we got the right field engineers in the right areas of the country as well? And again, because
Yeah.
it's a UK-wide organisation, so yeah, it just
Yes.
that curiosity thing and just those questions, it just opens people's eyes to and we all probably do it. Even you and I probably in our own businesses, you get sort of blinkered by what you're trying to do, and then somebody else comes along, maybe the coaches that I use or friends and go, oh, well, what are you doing that for, Dave? And have you thought about this? And you go, oh, I haven't, and it's just that principle, really.
Yeah, it really is that principle. I mean, the power of questions. I mean, if any of my clients are listening, they'll be rolling their eyes because I bang on about questions and the absolute beauty of them. Because I believe that they can create. First of all, they're engaging. So you could go in there and make a bunch of recommendations and tell them what they need to do. But instead, what you're doing, this is what I'm hearing, is inviting them to participate in that conversation rather than just be the recipient of
Yeah,
advice, so that, by participating, there's ownership in there. They're actually thinking things through. There's an education piece. There's just so much richness that comes from the power of asking questions, which is underpinned by curiosity, which is
yeah.
something I wanted to talk to you about because it's a brilliant perspective. I mean, you've kind of alluded to it and we've talked about questions here, but tell me a little bit more about why it's a key pillar of your business practice, and what would be your advice for those of us listening to get better at practicing curiosity, and when is it most helpful?
Well, I think for me, like you touched on it. Just curiosity is where everything starts for me. It's the spark that leads to better questions. It's
Right.
that leads to better decisions. That ultimately leads to better businesses for everybody concerned. When you're asking the questions from a point of curiosity, I think rather than judgment as well, because there's also different types of questions that we can ask. And I think if you're asking a question from I want to understand more, I think that opens the doors for everybody to explore the potential opportunities and upsides. And I think especially when you've got challenging moments, you explore the options rather than just reacting to the situation and going, the first solution that we find is the right solution. Because quite often I think that leads to um, potentially the wrong decisions being made. And history would dictate that I think people would think that curiosity is something that not necessarily we're born with, but people have got a more natural leaning towards. And whilst I sort of agree with that to a certain degree, I think to your point, I think we can all actually um, get better at practicing it. And with everything, it just starts with taking a few small steps. So it's things like, when you're facing a decision and you think you've got an answer, you just ask yourself, well, at this point in time, what else could be true? And just explore other ideas and other sort of, I suppose, left field thinking, or or something like that. And I'd also again go back to that point about exploring other people's perspectives about the same thing, because actually they aren't necessarily um, in it as much as you are, and therefore sort of I've got that step away from it, and that sort of view of, well, I need to understand what you're trying to solve here before I can offer advice or help you find an answer or another answer. Um, and I think the other thing is, and it goes back to that my first point really, but is recognize your own belief system and assumption about things, and actually question whether the belief is right in the first place, because that's actually where often the biggest insights and um, solutions, I think, come from, when you start questioning yourself and your own perspective. Because particularly, and again, even currently now, there's particular challenges in and around the global economy, and particularly over here in the UK, you could argue there's some significant challenges going on in the business world, certainly. So when there's that
Yeah.
uncertainty, curiosity gives you the power to help again find, I suppose, clarity in the chaos, which I suppose
Mm.
then leads to learning, which leads to knowledge, which then leads to sort of progress and growth. And I think those are the things really that ultimately the curiosity gives you in all of
Mm.
those areas.
Oh, so beautifully said, Dave. A couple of things stand out to me. There's a question that you asked before, and I thought I'm adding that to my repertoire because that's just personally, like, you know how you said if you're acting with curiosity, you're less likely to respond with judgment because it gets in the way. It kind of
Yeah,
disrupts that judgmentalism. But you said you asked a question that said, "What else could be true?" And I just thought, oh yeah, that's like my new favorite question because it's then what it does is it opens it, like it accepts, okay, well that might be true, but what else could be true? So there's just such a beautiful amount of wisdom in that question because it allows somebody to hold a thought or to hold a perspective, but then open up to more rather than saying, well, I don't agree with that, or haven't you thought about blah, 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 blah. It's just, that's just such a beautiful question. What else could be true? I am going to have that written somewhere because I love that question so much. And also, you know how you said about challenging our own beliefs. I mean, I think that's a good question for challenging our own beliefs because that's one of the things I'm gonna use that question to ask myself. What else could be true? What other questions could I ask myself, or the listeners ask themselves, to challenge their own, thoughts and beliefs that are helpful, around that?
yeah. I think I've sort of touched on it a little bit in answering the question originally. I think for
Yeah.
me, it's that it, it's get that point of going, yes, we found a solution, and everybody goes, okay, we found a solution. Let's crack on with that. And actually, it's sort of along similar lines to what else could be true, but it's almost what other solutions are there to this problem?
Yeah.
Because actually, quite often you'll find there is actually a better solution to the problem that isn't the
Yeah.
first solution. And I think
Yes.
asking that, and I think also um, another question that I quite often lead with, because I do a little bit of, I suppose, what I describe as business remodeling for people, is going, if you were starting this from scratch today, what would you do differently?
Mm.
And almost then you're almost challenging your own sort of beliefs and or status quo or comfort zone, whatever you want to call it, to go,
Yes.
right, okay, you know, you then go, well, actually, I'd make a decision.
Yeah.
And probably the other thing that I quite like is, and it goes a little bit goes back to the first point I made, which is, quite often the decision that we make is the easy decision as opposed to the right decision. So asking yourself, well, what's
Yeah.
the right decision here
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
for whatever you're considering, is
Yeah.
it might not be that, and therefore recognizing that the right decision might be hard to deliver, and
Yeah.
accepting of that fact, and
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, there's so much to explore here, but that's a great question. So if we had to start this again from scratch, what would we do differently? The theme that I'm picking up from all of, like, from your whole approach, your philosophy towards working with your clients, your approach to helping them to consider their situation with some different perspectives so that they're more innovative around how they create, a new direction or a new approach, is that you uphold you uphold their egos and their dignity while also giving them space to make room for something different. And that's not easy. That's really not easy. And I know, like we've just touched on challenging the status quo, and I know that we've sort of talked about some other questions around, well, we've always done it this way, and you've just said, okay, well, if we're starting from scratch, what else would we do? What else can companies do practically? So let's just say I've brought you in, and I've got my leadership team around me, and you're running a session. What are a couple of things that you would get them to do that we haven't discussed so far that would help to just shift that mindset of, because you always get a couple, like there's the eager beavers in the room that go, oh, Dave's here, this will be great, I can't wait, it's time for a change, I'm looking forward to coming up with new ideas. And then you've got those people that kind of sit there and they're like, I've seen it all, there's nothing new under the sun. What's this going to do? We're going to go down a path, and it's going to, we already know what we're doing, Dave, and we've always done it this way, and blah, blah, blah. How do you start to kind of put a little crack in that wall to let some light in?
I mean, first of all, I absolutely love where this conversation's going and this particular subject, because I think, like, comfort zone, status quo, whatever you want to call it. I think particularly actually for businesses that are seen on the outside or even internally as being successful, that can be a really dangerous place for them to be. Because I think what happens then, there is a danger that complacency sort of comes into play. And I've seen that in big businesses I've worked in. I've seen that in some of the clients I've worked with, or people I've spoken to, or even some of my friends, and therefore you just go, right, okay, right, let's just take a sort of a step back, I suppose. And I've mentioned this a couple of times
Yeah,
before, but I do think it's just a common theme through this conversation where whether it's a fresh pair of eyes via whether it be me coming into a business, or whether it be a mentor, whether it be a coach, whether it be somebody outside your industry as well. I think that's quite an interesting
yeah,
topic for people to consider. Is that, again, as we've always discussed, I've been very, very lucky, privileged to work with some very good businesses and clients in very varied industries. It's very rare I've worked. So all of my clients that I've worked with so far in my own business have actually been in different industries to the ones I worked with in corporate life. Because
okay,
actually, whilst yes, in some instances industry experience is great, there's also an element of restricting your thinking. And so therefore, if somebody comes in and goes, well, actually, I don't know, let's take multi-site companies as an example, where you can have hospitality, retail, you could have childcare, you could have logistics companies, you could have, warehousing, all of those things, but they're all multi-site operations. And the general principles of running a multi-site operation are no different. So actually, you could take some learnings from another industry in that regard, just as an example, because those questions that those people would ask would be very different to the questions that you would ask within your own business. That's probably number one, is stepping back and getting a fresh perspective in some way, shape, or form. I think the second one probably, and I sort of touched on this earlier, which is actually invite feedback, but actually listen to it as well at the same time. Because I think,
yes,
again, I think you touched on it earlier about you sort of, people invite feedback and then don't like what the feedback's telling them. And I sort of sit there going, well, you shouldn't have asked for the feedback in the first place if you were going to be. Don't ask the question if you don't think you're going to like the answer, I suppose, is the point I'm making there. Because actually, particularly, I think, your team within a business, your clients or customers within a business, some of your supplier partners in your business will have a very different perspective on your business to what you would have. and actually they can
Mm.
see blind spots that maybe you might not. And therefore that then, if you're inviting the feedback and listening to it, it creates those safe environments and safe spaces for people to feel comfortable providing the feedback as well, because people are listening and people are taking those opportunities and those ideas on board to actually, potentially implement them and things like that. And then I think
Mm.
the final thing, and again, it all goes back to me for just asking yourself better questions.
Mm.
It's, you know, how can we fix this? What's really driving this problem, and going back to sort of, not necessarily resolving the problem that's right in front of you at that point in time, or challenge is going, well, okay, well, what's caused this in the first place? If we fix this now, is it just going to re-emerge in a different guise in 6 months' time because we haven't fixed what the root cause of the problem actually is? And I think those
Yeah.
three things: stepping back, inviting feedback, asking yourself and your business better questions, are the three things that I think would challenge the status quo in any business.
Oh, gee, that's powerful. And yet it's the beauty lies in the simplicity of those perspectives, and having that facilitated by someone like you to help a company to kind of navigate through some of those discussions would be very valuable. So, yeah, taking a step back, I think, is always good because that invites a different perspective for a start. But the bit that really struck me, and I thought, God, that's really powerful, is you know how you said about inviting feedback and really listening to it. But the other part to that was inviting feedback from the ecosystem,
Mhm.
around the business. So not just inviting feedback from one, like when we talk about inviting feedback, it's usually in the form of feedback from co-workers or from our direct reports or from the sales team or from our customers. But we don't think about, like you mentioned, suppliers or, other people that sort of sit around a business that all have a very different experience with the
Mhm.
business. And they're going to also see opportunity that we don't see in the business as well. And by excluding them from any kind of discussion about, challenging the status quo, we could be missing out on some real insight of people that know us really well,
Yeah,
albeit through a different lens.
yeah, and I think it's, to me, it sort of fits into the, I suppose, collaboration box rather than, I don't know, competition's probably not the right word, but I mean, it's that bit about going, well, actually, let's make this business better by inviting everybody who's involved with
Yeah.
with the business, not just in it or buying from us or that sort of thing. And as you say, when we invite customer feedback, particularly, it tends to be
Yes.
in the form of, I don't know, I suppose testimonials in our sort of world, or customer reviews on TripAdvisor or Trustpilot or those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And actually, that yes, that people will flag different things about the business, good, bad, or indifferent. But actually, if you've got no way of then taking that in and on board and processing it, and I always used to like the phrase when I worked in corporate life, when we did sort of employee engagement surveys, and you almost need to do a "you said, we did" follow up to show that you've actually listened
Right.
to what the teams have been feeding back about what it's like working in the business, and what the leadership have done to address some of those, you know issues, or that are being raised. And I
You're
think
so
that's
right.
that's the bit for me that we don't do enough of, in that, as you say, that ecosystem that sits around businesses, where we
Yeah.
go, oh, actually, yeah, I wonder what our, I don't know, stationery supplier thinks about,
Yeah.
the welcome that they get when they enter the building. You
Right.
know, it's those sorts of little things that you just
Yeah.
don't. think about, and actually, are you, is the way the business operating, you know, you know, or have those suppliers got other contacts that actually they could introduce you to? And going back to my point about my network's quite open
Yeah.
for my client partners, and I don't make, I'm not ashamed by that, because there's people I trust deeply with the specialisms that they've got that I would introduce my network to as part of my relationship with a client. And it's little things like that actually make all the
Mm.
difference when it comes to business, in my view, or modern day business, particularly, I think.
No, you're spot on, Dave. I mean, God, I wish more businesses did what you just said before. You said we did, because I think there is a lot of feedback. That companies say that they want, like you said about the trust pilot. If I see one more set of smiley faces or stars, and then you know, whether it be, after an Uber trip or after I
Yeah,
bought a pair of socks, for God's sake, what was my experience? My experience was just I bought a pair of socks. Like, it wasn't an experience, it was just the socks are
yeah,
great. I'm happy with the socks. But, you know, I think when we're asked for feedback and yet the other side of that feedback is missing, like you said, how is that feedback being used and what have they done with it? Um, I have no doubt that if more feedback was communicated in the way that you've just outlined, more people would feel really invested in giving more higher quality feedback rather than just, surface level, ratings without really thinking about the impact
mm,
because they know that it's going to be utilised.
yeah. And I think certainly, having spent 17 years of my 25 years in corporate life in hospitality,
Right.
which is all about creating amazing experiences for individuals that are
Yes.
coming into pubs, bars, and restaurants and hotels. Um, that's the one industry where I do genuinely believe that a lot of people could learn about the way they adopt customer, sort of experience, and the way they've got the ability to recognise that actually something might not have gone as well as it could have done, and
Yep.
therefore, what are we doing to resolve, that thinking? And it's just reminding me. I don't know why it's just popped into my head as we've been talking, but there's an amazing book by Matthew Syed called Black Box Thinking.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
Matthew Syed, so it's Syed surname. So, from I don't want to do Matthew a disservice, because in terms of his career prior to being an author and a journalist, but I believe he was part of like the Great Britain table tennis team, competed at Commonwealth Games and Olympics, and then came into journalism. But black box thinking is all about the principles of airlines, or one of the principles is about how airlines treat, unfortunately, when they have near misses or disasters, and the black box tells you everything you need to know about what's happened, and they go and they review that, and then they'll change, processes to avoid the same thing
Yeah.
happening again. I'm sort of paraphrasing his book here, and
Yeah.
to a certain degree, but he compares that with perhaps a different approach in the medical profession, and just the difference that can have on the way, both, again, as we've just discussed, the experience for everybody involved, not just the patient's
Oh,
family and the doctor, but then that wider hospital ecosystem, the wider medical ecosystem, the wider public ecosystem. And
yeah.
so, yeah, it was just that's, I love that book, and it's uh, it's something that, yeah, if anybody's looking to sort of either think about challenging the status quo, or looking at a sort of a principle to follow in terms of taking feedback and following it. And then another book that uh, I've read is called Be More Pirate, which again is all about um, challenging the status quo. But again, the principle of that is is about, pirates traditionally have been seen as, going in, you know, robbing other ships, all of this thing. But actually, when you look at the ecosystem they created and the level playing field that everybody on a ship had in terms of their, everybody had a vote on decisions, everybody, the bounty got shared between everybody near
Mm,
enough equally, apart from I think the captain of the ship and the bursar or whatever. So it's just little things like that where you read it
mm,
and go, oh, that's an interesting
mm.
thing to consider, which the book's all about when you think about the way businesses, operate and the whole equity piece. And do we feel actually like we've got a sense of belonging and purpose in the organisations that either we're working for or with? Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, you've quoted a couple of other people's books, but you've written a couple of your own. We're going to have the links to your books included in the show notes, as well as a link to your website. How else can people connect with you, Dave?
Yeah, so I do most of my work through LinkedIn. So if people search for Dave Rogers, the Business Explorer, you'll find me on LinkedIn. I tend to post at least once a day, just sharing insights and reflections and ideas for business owners and leaders to help them, improve their businesses really around whether it be sort of I don't know wider business strategy or technology or customer experience or employee experience like we've spoken about. You can also find me on Substack. I write twice weekly sort of newsletter on Substack. So again, search for the Business Explorer. You'll find me on Substack. And then finally, as you said, thank you for sharing my book links in
Of
the show
course.
notes. But if anybody does want to explore my TEDx talk, my books, any of my free resources, um, use my Linktree link, which is contained within my LinkedIn profile, and you can find links to everything and anything on my Linktree profile.
Absolutely outstanding. Gosh, I'm glad that we got together, and thank you, Ian, if you're listening, for introducing us. And if you're ever in Australia, you must make sure that you reach out, my friend.
I will, and likewise, if you're in the UK, please reach out to
Thanks.
me, and we'll.
Love that.
It'd be nice to meet face
Yeah,
to face.
yeah, absolutely. I really love that. I absolutely love that. Well, I'll let you maybe decide whether you put your slippers back on or whether you get yourself another cup of coffee and start your day. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Dave. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Ingrid. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and I've absolutely loved the conversation. I hope the viewers and listeners have too.
Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how the Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.